Okay, so we had quite a number of registrations. Last time I checked, it was 208 registrations. Unfortunately, not everybody eventually pitches because life happens to us. But I think, yeah, it's a very nice spread of attendees today, from the academia to business, a couple of governmental entities, local government, provincial government, a couple of journalists as well. Yeah, and then we are privileged to have our guest speakers here. At 12 o'clock, we'll start with the proceedings.
Max, as you will know it, that and Irahj and Qaanitah, sometimes some of the questions might be either offensive or sycophantic. It's really just around the mill and normal. So don't be offended by it. It's not personal. It assumes from a different perspective that I think that you are mistaken. That's all. Not mine, a different one.
I wouldn't mind.
That's what makes this type of discussions interesting, and if it's done in the right spirit, potentially constructive.
No, I have meat in this thing that if I offend Max, I might be fired. If I offend Albert, I might be fired too.
I quite appreciate a sycophantic question. I don't think I've ever had one in my life.
Okay, you'll get one.
It's always the first time.
There's always the first time, says Raymond.
Just to say, I'm going to have to drop off just before 1, if that's possible.
Yes, I've taken into consideration, so I might emphasize you a little bit more in the beginning to get as much out of you as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
See, we're near at 12 o'clock. Give a couple of seconds. Yeah, I see it's already a question on the logistics. We do record this session. So if you're not able to listen the whole time, you're welcome to contact us to get a recording. Of course, that's also a warning to Piet, the fact that it is recorded, what happens. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. According to my watch, it's 12 o'clock in Potchefstroom. A warm welcome to all of you. This is our third think tank webinar for the year. In this edition, we will be unpacking the recent ANC National Policy Conference. We know that it happens amidst a number of challenges: unemployment, inequality, continued load shedding, corruption, and extreme violence. And this is what the governing party needs to deal with, as all of us in the country. The impact of these events, specifically with a view to the December elective conference and the coming national election, is of particular significance to South African business and society. And today we will be discussing this. Our chair for the session will be Dr. Piet Croucamp. Our distinguished panel of experts, Dr. Irahj Abedian, economist and well-known economist, Ms. Qaanitah Hunter, assistant editor at News 24, Mr. Max du Preez, political commentator and editor of Vrye Weekblad, and then Dr. Mpumelelo Mkhabela, a political analyst and columnist. Thank you for everybody who's also attending. We have a number of distinguished guests. I'm not going to welcome all of you, but do feel welcome. You are welcome to post any questions you have in the comment box, and we trust that Dr. Croucamp will attend to it. But without further ado, Piet, we're in your capable hands.
Thank you, Albert. On the eve of the July 2022 policy conference, the management of the African National Congress met to manage the robust debates expected at that conference. Paul Mashatile had to call in provincial chairpersons and secretaries to impose the will of Luthuli House. I'm sure Siboniso Dume of the KZN province had a lot to say for himself and Mashatile at that meeting. This in the context of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who put it bluntly when he said, the ANC is today at its weakest and its most vulnerable since the advent of democracy. ANC General Manager Phoebe Potgieter suggested that, and I quote, this would make this conference the one where the ANC as an organization either sink or we get serious about renewal. Qaanitah Hunter, you've been there. One of the policy discussion documents at the conference is entitled The Changing Balance of Forces Around the South African Transformation Agenda. I'm 30 years in politics. I couldn't figure that one out. What does it mean? Is the ANC renewing or sinking?
I think that the ANC gathered at that Nasrec Convention Center this past weekend to try to maintain that public narrative that it is on a path of renewal, to insist to say that we are doing things differently, even when all indications point to the fact that things have not changed in many aspects in relation to factionalism, in relation to manipulation of party structures, and in relation to their governance. They also met at a time where after the local government elections, where it was a bloody nose for the ANC. We got 47%, an unprecedented electoral outcome for the ruling party, lost so many metros and key municipalities. And so it gathered now in an effort to gauge the temperature, to almost seem to be, this is what we're trying to do. President Cyril Ramaphosa, since he was elected almost 5 years ago, maintained this mission to reform and to renew the ANC. One can question whether that's even possible, given how, arguments around the fact that the party may have been corrupted to the core, and that if you look at the Zondo report, that perhaps a renewal of the party may not be possible. And if you also just look at the pace in which the president had been, and his allies rather, had been able to implement reform in the last 5 years, you get a sense that they're not really serious about that. And it comes through platitudes and without real concrete plans around how is it that that the party is actually going to renew. The big question at this conference going in was this step aside policy, a policy taken at the last conference, implemented 2 years ago, to say that if you are criminally charged, you have to step aside from your position. And most recently, the NEC resolved that you are disqualified from contesting leadership positions if you are criminally charged. And there's been a lot of pushback in relation to that, and it became the proxy debate for this particular conference, and will be the proxy debate to December because of how many people it affects. If you're charged, you're unable to even put your name in the race for any leadership position, and that affects so many people from branch level all the way to the top 6 of the ANC.
But Siboniso Dume is right when he says that, if I can stay with you for a while, when he argues that this assumption that you're guilty now becomes a guilty, which means if you are charged, you lose all the privileges of being a member of the party. Without being guilty, you could be found not guilty later on, but you still pay a heavy price. And remember, the Hawks and the NPA can take years, if not a decade, to resolve the issue and for justice to be served. In the meantime, your career is being ruined. Don't people like the KZN provincial chair have a valid point when they argue that this step aside is political rather than a sense of justice.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've long argued that the step-aside policy is a PR mechanism by Cyril Ramaphosa and his allies in an effort to say, look what we're doing to combat corruption without meaningfully rooting out corruption. This is not a disciplinary effort in the ANC. If the ANC really was serious about rooting out corruption, that, you know, to set a precedent, because these type of policies should be implemented to set a precedent, to say, don't you dare touch corruption because this will be your fate. What it does then is, you know, you can still be a member of the legislature, for example, you'll still get your salary. You just can't be active in ANC structures and publicly, represent the party because, you know, people will think we corrupt. So it's a managing public perception, which is why it is so fickle in many ways. And then the question comes about natural justice and the question that was debated 5 years ago about innocent until proven guilty. Now that constitutional prescript is what they're debating now, to say, what does this mean for the ANC? The reality of it is that we should not be caring as citizens about the ANC step-aside policy, because frankly speaking, if the ANC wants corruption-accused leaders like Zandile Kobede and Mandla Msibi and others to represent the party, then it's up to the elective to say, no, we don't want you as a party. What happens internally is a mechanism trying to create a fallacy that you are actually being serious about corruption. And now, when you have people saying, what happens when I'm on trial for 8 years and I can't contest leadership in all of this time? What happens? Essentially, the accusation that President Cyril Ramaphosa is outsourcing the renewal of the ANC to decisions of prosecutors in various parts of the country, where it's the NPA that then has to make the political call.
I think you're right. And you agree with the KZN chair. And the other thing is, you can sit in the provincial legislature in KwaZulu-Natal, but you cannot attend the policy conference of the ANC.
And again, I mean, the point is that we've seen in places like Limpopo and others, whereas leaders were, for example, those who are accused for the VBS corruption may not be able to stand themselves, but what happens then is that they appoint proxies to contest leadership positions in their place. The reality of it is the ANC has an identity issue that it needs to deal with, which is around the fact that, you know, why are so many of its leaders implicated in criminality? And that's a separate issue from the public. Now, having people step aside, so it's not about agreeing with Spuniso Duma or the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. It's this. President Cyril Ramaphosa used the step-aside policy to sell a facade of renewal to the public. If that is reversed, basically the political outcome of that is that the little leg that he had to stand on to say to the public, look, this is how we're dealing with this endemic corruption in the party, falls down. And what happens then is the public doesn't even have this one thing to hold on to, this one silver lining to say, no, step aside will actually save the ANC from this endemic corruption. But as me and you have now said, what that policy really was just to manage public perception rather than truly dealing with the uncomfortable elephant in the room, and that is endemic corruption in the party.
I was hoping to disagree with you today. Mpumelelo, welcome. Thank you for being around again. In the policy document distributed to the conference, the party, the ANC, implicates itself by suggesting, and I quote, "It is common knowledge today that at the core of the subversive anarchy and looting in July 2021 were disgruntled ANC members. Which party in an established democracy will confess to that and remain in power? Not even Donald Trump, and I would suggest he gave it a good go." Mpumi? You're on mute. Mpumi, you're on mute.
I think I'm audible now.
Yes, yeah. You go. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's true, Piet, that they've made kind of admission. And I think it's a question of, it's impossible for them to deny that because it's common cause. Actually, the Sendi Africa report on the July unrest does mention that up the preface, it makes it very clear that most of the people that they viewed actually pointed out to ANC factions as among the root causes of the July unrest. Of course, there's been a lot of debates about the underlying causes, that the fertile ground of unemployment, income inequalities, poverty, and all of that. That's the ground that South Africa is facing with. But however, it always requires a trigger for something like that to turn into a violence. And in this case, the ANC factions, particularly those that were offended by the incarceration of Jacob Zuma, then they triggered this July unrest. So it's basically predominantly an ANC a faction that drove that. There's also in that document you are quoting, Piet, there's a section there where there's a whole lot of conspiracy about what they believe that there are elements from the former apartheid regime that have infiltrated the ANC, and they are working with others within the ANC, basically to mount a counter-revolutionary agenda against constitutional democracy. So, and they say the ANC would be delusional to believe that such elements don't exist within their ranks. So you find this type of things where the ANC basically admits that itself, it is a problem. And that also came through in the address by President Cyril Ramaphosa, opening the conference, where he actually said that in most of this, for example, in local government, where there had been lots of incidents of corruption, and she pointed out to a discussion he had with the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. The two of them concurred that the problem in municipalities, it's the ANC. And he said that in the opening address. So this admission is out there. The question then is what to do with it. And they are very good at diagnosing their own problems. But I think the ANC really has a problem when it comes to having to act to show that actually their diagnosis, they're taking it seriously, and they are actually ready to put across remedies. So they fall short on remedies. And again, the reason why they fall short on remedies is because these problems that they're pointing out are so overwhelming that even when they try to implement solutions, it becomes difficult. Those very same solutions are subject to factional battles, and it becomes difficult for any leadership to implement remedial actions.
I want to return to something that happened prior to the policy conference in the ANC. And that was the president's announcement, or was it afterwards? No, the president's announcement on energy. And I've seen on Twitter that you were rather critical, arguing that why was this not decided on 3 years ago and not implemented earlier? We all knew it. It's been sent to government for years now. It's not being done. And then a day after the announcement, widely in the media, a lot of real experts said, well, you're not going to see any reduction of load shedding within the next 3 years. And we just heard it today. It started again. Not going to see any reduction of load shedding in the next 3 years. The president created the impression that these are immediate, urgent steps that will change everything immediately, didn't he?
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, and greetings to all present. I was surprised and also sadly disappointed because for my sins, I've been involved in this energy debate since 1999. And the debate is not new. For example, what's the debate? We have 55% at that time. Back in 1999, 80% of its end of economic life. So if in 2000, you know that 30% of your capacity is dying, you start planning and doing, not talking about it, doing it quietly so that the economy does not suffer the consequences. Now, fast forward 14 years ago, after we failed in 1999, 2000 to do something about it, 8 years later, we had the first so-called blackout at that time. We now call it generously load shedding. So it took 8 years for government to do nothing, knowing fully well, being told by engineers, by policy analysts, by Eskom's own commission report, of which my team did one of them. So it's not as if I'm talking theory and hypothesis. And we can bring all the CEOs of Eskom since 2000. They'll tell you how many memos they've written to how many ministers and 3 cabinets and 3 presidents, and nobody has learned anything from it. The sad...
Irahj, just what would you have done differently? The president made his announcements. We knew he should have said all of this earlier. What would you expected of him on that night to say differently from what he's done? And what can he do to actually expedite implementation?
I would have brought 3 ministers with me to the press announcements with the president, not alone. I would have sat down Minister of Energy, Minister of Trade and Industry, Minister of State Enterprises, and say, guys, the 4 of us have caused this problem and we need to solve it within 48 hours. Not we will see and we will relax this and all that nonsense that everybody observes and does nothing about it. This is a teamwork. This is not a presidential pronouncement or ministerial pronouncements. You bring the team so it gives it credibility. At the same time that the president was making an announcement, the Minister of Energy had his own plots to do, and Minister of Trade and Industry has other ideas. You don't manage a company like that. You cannot manage a crisis like that. Imagine, Piet, we have the following situation. Imagine imaginary enemies are attacking us from the 3 sides of the borders, and the president has to make a call what to do. He doesn't come and say, guys, we have a problem, let's have a meeting. And every moment the enemy gets to destroy more and more and more and more. At that time, you act. There is nothing that he needs to know that he doesn't know. As the deputy president, as a chair of the war room of the Eskom, as anybody, we all know what the solution is. You don't hide. He's become an academic governor. He observes, he issues statements, and he goes home. I've been an academic. You're sitting in an academic institution. When you do a research and you publish it and you celebrate, champagne opens, we published it, and you go to the next project. The government at the moment manages energy in that. How would I manage it? I would bring the 4 ministers. I would bring, before that, the players who are in the private sector and public sector, and I would make a timeline. There is a difference between vision and plan. Plan has got a timeline, a budget, a well-known and transparent manager. At the moment, we don't know who the face of these alternative producers are. We think they are in the private sector, but private sector can be Hitachi, which has caused a lot of problems. It can be General Electric, which is the mother of all problems. It can be Chancellor House, that we don't still know what their role they have played in the energy crisis. And it goes, they're all private sector, right?
Because we know a little bit, because we know...
We know more than what we need to know that this is a cause, this is an orchestrated problem. It is not just a technical problem. We also know, Piet, that the reason some of the problems of Eskom perpetuates because the diesel contracts are hugely rich and it benefits certain people. We also know that when the diesel depots are looted 2 months ago, 1 billion rand was stolen. It wasn't stolen by hungry people and by desperate people. It was stolen by well-orchestrated, politically connected and covered gangsters. Now, what does the president doesn't know that you and I know? What's wrong? Yeah. Where is the army to protect our reserves? Where is the army to, and every minister comes and says, no, we are the victim of sabotage. Hell, what do you do a sabotage? We do not need a minister of sabotage. We need a minister who takes action and says, we prevented sabotage. We prevented load shedding. We prevented damage. A minister and the government that talks about retrospectively what the problem was, they must get out of the way.
Yeah, but Irahj, as you know, Minister Pravin Gordhan And he's
Minister of Sabotage. He is not Minister
well,
of
he's got a jurisdiction.
State
I wouldn't go
Enterprise.
that far, but he's got a jurisdiction, and he isn't conflicted with Minister Mantas on this. And Mantas got legitimate interest in what's happening at Eskom. So that stress fracture within government, that's is a serious problem with implementation, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's the job of the president. That takes us to another issue. Upon his coming to become the president, President Ramaphosa promised us that he has put a committee to rearrange, cut down the cabinet, streamline the inefficiencies, of which exactly one is what you say, which is a conflict, built-in conflict between the state enterprises and transport state enterprises and energy. In other words, the line functions and the state enterprises. It need not be if the cabinet performed well, but every cabinet minister thinks that I'm the emperor on my own, thou shalt not touch my empire. Nonsense. This is not political ideology. This is a business you run, business of national security, national welfare, poverty, unemployment. You can't have your own fiefdom.
Max de Pre, what do you make of this rather enigmatic character of Gweri Mantas? At the conference, he was the only one that could do that. He stood up and said, the next one who sings, what happened to Zuma or what has he done, will leave the conference. He openly opposes anything that Pravin Gordhan says. He's the first one to say at this policy conference that maybe we should reconsider our views on Section 25 of the Constitution. Maybe we should review our views and our policy decisions at the previous leadership conference on the Postbank and the role of the Reserve Bank in inflation targeting. That's brave. He wants to be elected as chairperson of the party again. I haven't seen anybody like that coming out that forthright, explaining himself and going contrary to policy decisions, both at the leadership conference and the policy conference, and survive it.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and it is telling. We know, and we've talked about it now, how ineffectual he is as energy minister. But what we saw at the conference is how much Cyril Ramaphosa needs him as the bulldog. And Ramaphosa doesn't have many of these. A guy who can smack a couple of faces and lay down the law. So he needed that protection, and he's untouchable. He is untouchable in any other reasonable society. In any other reasonable society, he would have been relieved of his duties as energy minister. But we saw the role that he was playing. But let me just say, broadly speaking, about my impression of this conference. Very few people in the country will disagree when you say we are facing our biggest crisis since 1994. I mean, the words existential crisis was used at the conference. A former president warned we're about to have an Arab Spring. And then you have a non-event like that, a policy conference of the National Liberation Movement of the government. I mean, it was to me sitting here, it was astonishing. I mean, Ramaphosa asked for a festival of ideas, and he got a festival of blah, 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 of rhetoric and dogma and orthodoxy. But yeah, the one thing that does come out of it is that Cyril is still unchallenged as the leader of the ANC. The RET faction was outmaneuvered. But it's also clear that the gloss is off our president. The clapping and the cheering when he spoke were very subdued. And in a sense, he's become the president by default, partly because there's no real challenger, but also partly because many in the ANC realized that without him at the helm, the ANC would get closer to 40% in 2024 than to 50%. I think we as the commentariat like to refer to the battle for the soul of the ANC. I think after this conference, we should start talking about the battle over the carcass of the ANC. But For a change, the Ramaphosa camp managed the policy conference well. I'm not sure if the same is going to happen in December with the elective conference, where it really counts. It's going to be much harder to manage. more than 4,000 delegates from all branches, a large chunk of that from KZN. And KZN has now got a provincial chair who is openly and strongly RET in Bekim Tolo. And in December, the RET faction will have their own candidate, and that might or might not be Zweli Mkhize. If it will be him if he's not affected by the step-aside rule by then. The only other candidate, Lindu Sisulu, again at this conference showed that she is not presidential material. She made remarks about chemical castration, and when a seasoned journalist criticized that, she launched into this personal attack. She's going nowhere. A last word. If Cyril Ramaphosa survives the Phala scandal, he will without doubt be the front runner in December by some distance. It's not so sure that he can be certain that the new top six of the party will mostly be from his camp. And Phala is still one of the most bizarre episodes in our politics in recent times. I mean, it's been months since Arthur Fraser made his allegations. And we know at least some of those allegations were true. There was a theft, there were dollars, they were stored in the furniture. And yet the president is still keeping his silence. And I think all reasonable people will say, the allegations of kidnapping and torture are a bit outrageous. But will Cyril Ramaphosa get around the fact that he was in possession of foreign currency without declaring it, and that he stored it in his furniture? I am not so sure.
What did you make of the subdued? What did you make of the subdued call it applause that the president received at the conference? It was rather subdued. It wasn't that of a populist or a popular leader at all.
If you compare his performance and the reaction to it now at the policy conference with the speeches he made in February 2018, it's chalk and cheese. He's permanently tarnished his own reputation through his own inaction and through Phala. He's not the clean and ethical leader that we all thought he was.
Qaanitah, how did he survive? How did this step-aside policy survive? Because remember, at least 3 provinces expressed their doubt about it, with I think at least 2 definitely being against it. And still it was, at the end, Ramaphosa announced the step-aside policy as generally accepted within the ANC. And if it's true, and I don't think it's true for a moment, but some people would suggest that the ANC is corrupt to the core, which means the majority of the members who attended that policy conference should support the corruption in various forms. But it seems like they were against it if they support the step-aside policy. How did the step-aside policy prevail?
You know, I want to remind you or signal you to a comment made by the ANC chairperson in Mpumalanga, Mandla Ndlovu, where he says, if we scrap step aside, we're scrapping ourselves out of government. And that was the realization that dawned at the conference, to say, we can't really go publicly and go, full blown in our fight against this, because this is what stands between us and this fickle policy. This facade of renewal is standing between us and a dismal electoral outcome in 2024. And so there was that reality. And even though the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, tried to put up a strong fight, they realized very quickly that this was not one they're going to win. And then there's also the realization that this is not one that they have to win, because the policy conference, they argued, is inconsequential in that it's just consultative by its nature. And if you look at the makeup of who actually comes to the policy conference, it's not nearly a proper sample of what's going to happen in December. And that's the point that I want to make, in that, yes, Ramaphosa may have left that policy conference with a political win, but how consequential was that political win in the run-up to December in relation to it being a real sample for how things may pan out in December? And I argue that possibly not the most adequate sample, despite what we have said that, the policy conference is usually a temperature check for what happens in December. But more importantly, I think that there's a realization that society is not going to tolerate this type of inward-looking dramatic fighting. And so they had to, in the absence of anything else, come forward and endorse Ramaphosa's ESCOM plan, come forward and then the only thing that they actually had to stand on was to fight for the implementation of unworkable policies taken in 2017 in the form of state bank, state pharmaceutical company, in the form of expropriation of land compensation, for example. When you just saw, you spoke about the muted response by the president. This is a president who's been endorsed for a second term. This is 4 or 5 months before the ANC elective conference. You need to see this sort of clamoring support for him or even for an opponent. You didn't see that. You saw disinterest from party delegates for their own party processes. By the time the president closed the address, half the hall was not there. Yes, there were songs in the form of, Pagama Ramaphosa by the ANC in the Eastern Cape and similar songs by the ANC in Limpopo. But the reality of it is that as much as this was a win for Ramaphosa in that his economic policies was affirmed, in that the party, treaded on caution in relation to the step-aside policy, at the end of the day, one can make the point that it was a hollow win.
I just, it needs to be remembered that in December is the branches that arrived at the leadership conference. Now it was more or less the leadership in the provinces, legislatures, and in the executive meeting of the ANC. It was not the branches. Branches dynamics will be very, very different. Qaanitah, just one last question for you. Gender issues, apart from the comments made by Lindiwe Sisulu, there was a committee that discussed gender issues at the conference. Do you have you attended, do you know anything that's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much a repeat of the same. There was this comment by Gwen Makgopa, I think, who said, the presidency must deal with the gender parity must be spearheaded from the presidency. And the irony of it is that you have a whole presidency. I think they forgot that there's a Ministry of Women, Children, and People with Disability that sits in the presidency. And so there's a lot of that conversations. Mpumelelo, you and I have spoken at the conference around the fact that it's almost as if these discussions happen outside of the reality of the day and of what the actual situation is and how things work in government. And one could take a step further, outside of these policy, outside of budgetary realities. And so there's this fantastical conversations that happen that are not premised on any form of reality, what's existing and what can be possible as well. I mean, just talk about the conversation around a youth ministry. What do you need a youth ministry for? And the Youth League even saying, actually, this is inconsequential. What we want is a 40% push for young people in the ANC NEC. Now, Piet, you'd remember in 2017 that women empowerment, having a female president was pretty much the a tagline of the conference in the push to have Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma elected. What the whispering that you hear now is that youth whispering. So when the president talks about having young people, that's the loudest he gets applause for in his opening address. And then this push by the Youth League to say 40% of all leadership positions must be young people. And I see that you're not going to have this RET faction versus the CR faction this time around. I think that those structures, as we know it, have completely dissolved in that way. What you're going to have, and what you've already seen manifest itself in the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal and in bits of Limpopo as well, is this this real push by a group of young ex-Youth League leaders who are claiming their positions within the party. You see it, it's quite fascinating when you look at the regional leadership of the ANC in the 11 regions in KwaZulu-Natal, all youngsters, people who've not, been part of the status quo, people who've been in the youth structures, making their way to provincial chairs and secretary. And now you have it in the form of Siboniso Duma and Bheki Mtolo, who are both ex-Youth League leaders, kind of reclaiming their space. So there's this effort to have this young blood of the ANC to say, we cannot let this party die with these old people. So I think if there's going to be a euphemism of how opposition is raised against Ramaphosa, I think under the cover of this generational renewal, generational push for leadership is going to be used as the umbrella under which it happens.
Yeah, but the Women's League is almost abandoned, same as the Youth League. But we must admit that the ANC is, as far as gender representation is concerned, is the best gender representative party in South Africa. 50% of members of legislatures are women, and the same goes for various other structures of the party, except for Lutuli House itself. So it's not as if the ANC is insensitive to the gender imbalance that exists in society.
I think a lot has happened, and good fights were fought in relation to that gender parity question, and I mean that's not something that the party doesn't appreciate. I think now it's a sense of what do we do further? Why do you have the situation where only 2 regions in the entire country are led by women, for example? And so why are women getting inconsequential positions as deputy secretaries, etc.? And the same conversation is being led now in terms of the makeup of the different slates that will emerge. Why is it so male heavy, and why women are getting inconsequential positions like deputy secretary general and nothing else? There is this push by the Women's League that the top 6 or the top leadership of the ANC must be balanced according to gender. I don't know if that will ever be possible, but there's also this interesting conversation to track. And that is to expand the top 6 to a top 8 of sort. I don't know if it will gain momentum. This was tried last time around and it was shut down, but that conversation definitely exists. At the same time, there's a conversation to reduce the size of the NEC to become more effective, because 80 people meeting every second month to decide things, it becomes talk shop after talk shop after talk shop. So there's this conversation to say, almost to the spirit of Mbeki, fewer but better. But the point is that I don't see that flying as much as some party leaders are saying, we have a 40-member NEC, 20 women, 20 men, we can get things done, we can push things through. You have a bigger leadership structure with, people having very specific, almost to professionalize the leadership of the ANC. And I don't know if that's going to be possible, but I do think, you are right when you say there has been gender sensitivity in the party. But obviously, the party is now at a place where it has to take that forward into something more consequential. And I don't know if that's going to happen come December.
Mpumelelo, there are a few lunatics down there in the Western Cape where Max de Pre lives who want the Cape to secede, to become independent. But they're lunatics. But you know what? I start to fear for KwaZulu-Natal. I honestly think that they are being marginalized within the ANC and the liberation movement, and perhaps even South African politics, to the extent that violence or the threat of violence is the only way that they can move back into the center of national politics within the ANC and South Africa. They are literally marginalized to the extent that I think there's a degree of alienation taking place in KwaZulu-Natal, which might just resonate with unruly type of behavior.
I don't think your diagnosis is correct, Piet. I don't think KwaZulu-Natal is being...
When you were a student, you said that, when you were my student, you said the same thing, and you repeat yourself again.
I don't think you are correct, Piet, because if KwaZulu-Natal is sort of isolated or being ignored or whatever term you use, I think it's them who are actually isolating themselves, because they are backward looking. Jacob Zuma is history. They must accept that Jacob Zuma is no longer the leader of the ANC. He's a former leader of the ANC, number one. Number two, they must accept that Jacob Zuma, their preferred leader, betrayed them. They don't want to accept that Zuma betrayed them. So even as Zuma falls with all his corruption allegations, with all the state capture, all of these things that happened under him, KwaZulu-Natal ANC leaders don't want to accept that Zuma betrayed them and Zuma failed them. He didn't become the leader that he should have been. So to the extent that they're still loyal to him, it's a question of regionalism. So they should go beyond that regionalism. The other point that they forget, that for Zuma to rise to where he is, it was not only the effort of KwaZulu-Natal. I remember very well, I was in Polokwane. Of course, KwaZulu-Natal brought the biggest region in the country, which is the eThekwini region. But without the region of the OR Tambo region in the Eastern Cape, I am not sure whether Zuma would have won that conference. Remember, it was a 60-40 split between Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. So the second biggest region in the country, they had a grievance against Mbeki. That was OR Tambo region. Then Zuma successfully lobbied them to join his presidential campaign. And that's how Zuma became president. So beside that, he also had sprinkled of support around the country. But KwaZulu-Natal seemed to think that Zuma is their sole, what should I say, is their exclusive right sort of kind of candidate. So even as he loses support around the country, they want to keep their support. So I think they should accept that they were sort of betrayed by Zuma. He didn't live up to expectation. And number two, and he actually refuses to make up for whatever wrong that he did, and then now forces them to support him in a very dangerous manner, like, for example, what happened with the July unrest, where he now had to confront the judiciary, and something which the rest of the population and many of Zuma's own supporters don't appreciate, because a lot of them, they accept the fact that he rose through the ranks legitimately. He was the president legitimately through the constitution. They don't accept that now the very same constitution that he used to rise to the top, he now wants it dismantled. So I think what is now happening is that a lot of people also miscalculate in KwaZulu-Natal. They miscalculate Zuma's popularity. They believe that if they support Zuma, all of these people that used to support Zuma, the majority and all these crowds are going to follow them. And they're not dynamic enough to analyze the political environment in South Africa, that people transcend the people that they support. So it's the same as Thabo Mbeki. He was at some point very popular, but people at some point they go beyond, they understand this time is up. The same will happen to Ramaphosa.
Mpumelelo, I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. That one, remember, you always got 99%. That 1% where you're wrong. And I'm going to ask Max de Preez, you're going to enjoy white privilege here and gang up against you. I'm going to ask him if he supports me, and I think he will. Let me put it this way. You are deluded by a decoy runner. Jacob Zuma is no real force in KwaZulu-Natal politics. We all think he is, just because they sing about him, just because they call up his name. And the unhappy coincidence of this violence that erupted in KwaZulu-Natal soon after his arrest in July. I honestly think he's a spent force and not really an important force around which the ANC can mobilize, and not even in KwaZulu-Natal. Max de Preez, I'm sure you agree with me.
Yeah.
But Peter, you're not fair, because I needed to answer that question before Max can come in.
Okay, yes.
Go.
Yes.
If the KwaZulu-Natal leaders don't think that Zuma is a force, why do they have to report to him? For example, when the eThekwini regional leaders were elected, they went to report to Nkandla that, oh, now, Mr. President, we have got a new leadership. And then even at the conference, they were singing, when's the new Zuma? Ramaphosa must answer. What did Zuma done? The new chairperson, after he was elected a chairperson in the provincial conference, among the things he said in his speech, he said, look, we are law-abiding people here in KwaZulu-Natal, but we don't understand what has Zuma done. So it's a question of denial. They are in denial that Zuma made mistakes. And they also don't want to accept that when someone makes mistakes, he should be punished. But they happily accepted when Mbeki was recalled, but they don't want to accept when Zuma is punished for his own mistakes. So I am saying that they are a bit delusional in a sense that they are isolating themselves, because the rest of the country, including Zuma supporters around the country, they've moved on to other factions now, way beyond Zuma.
Exactly. Exactly. That's
Can
my point.
can I jump in here? Can I jump in here, Piet?
Yes,
Sorry,
yes.
Max. Just to say that it's not us that are imagining it. They are saying this. They drafted a whole analysis report of the outcome of elections, and they are saying that the society is rejecting them because of how they treated Zuma. That's what they are saying. We are not saying that. They are claiming, they're trying to mobilize on the premise of that, because they need a victim. They need, well, how else? They need to create a boogeyman, because remember, they are beneficiaries. They are all beneficiaries of the Zuma patronage systems. They held up an entire system. They were cogs in a system that Zuma created for them, and they're now beneficiaries of it. And so it's not this imagined thing that whether Zuma has real influence or doesn't have real influence. They are saying he has influence, and they're riding on that wave. So it's not about us to analyze it, to say whether it's true, it's not true. The fact that they are doing that, and they're throwing the scarecrow of Zuma, and again they tried to do it at the conference. It didn't really fly. But the point is, if you have to look, if you take a step back, this is not really about an 80-year-old man. What this really is about how do you create a level of protection for when you need it laid down the road. And the point is this, that we need a figure that's going to bring us all together, so that when we all need protection, we have this protection that comes in support of this popular man that we keep alive in the form of Jacob Zuma. It's not about his fate. It's not about his well-being. It's not about really how popular he is. It's about just asserting that political cover that it comes with that.
Max, if there was a real contender for Ramaphosa, the leadership conference at the end of the year, don't you think Zuma would have played no role? His name is only mentioned in the absence of such a real contender. Max?
Oh, back to me. Yeah, I tend to agree a little bit with Qaanitah.
Sorry to hear that.
That he's a total spent force. And I think that the posses traveling to Nkandla do not really go and listen to pearls of wisdom. They don't really need his advice. He's no strategist anymore. I mean, his strategist is Mpumelelo Mkhabela nowadays, and I mean that says a lot. And his daughter. So it's about symbolism. It's about a martyr. And let me walk into very tricky terrain here. It's about ethnic chauvinism. There's a mobilization around being Zulu speaking. And he is the guy who brought it into the ANC way back, but especially after he became the president. And it's part of that dynamic. But I mean, he is old, he is clueless, he is powerless, he is just a symbol and a martyr.
Irahj, two other things at the policy conference that caught my attention. The one is the suggestion of the post bank, of a state bank, and the post bank. Well, that's Tito Mbek's old hobby horse. And the other one was the idea that state-owned enterprises should be returned to its line managers. And I think that was in direct reference to the fact that Eskom is under Gordhan and not under Mantashe. What did you make of that?
I think two points, or the umbrella point that I like to make is that came out very clearly from this policy document is the fact that we have an organization that is incapable of learning. In other words, it keeps repeating the same thing 20 years later. For example, a state bank. Well, we know Land Bank collapsed. It's a state bank. It was, it still is a state bank. Collapsed. Do you want to create another one to collapse it with a new type of corruption? A post bank collapsed. It was a state bank. Itala Bank collapsed. It's a state bank. IDC is a shadow of what it used to be. It's a state investment bank. It's still there, thankfully. But if it's not done properly, it will go the same way as the others. So state enterprises and this whole notion of a statism is such a 19th, 20th century, mid-20th century concept in governance of modern societies, be it on the political side or on the economic side. So I find that very tragic, sad, that an organization is lost such a substantial amount of intellectual capital that can not learn from its own mistake. You can fool some people some of the time, but you cannot fool yourself all of the time. You cannot set up another state bank, having now just failed 3-4 of them in the past decade. You cannot set up another state enterprise. Those who talk about ESCOM 2, I'm referring, or they have this glamorous, fanciful, nonsensical concept of the 19th century that the state enterprises can be the bedrock of empowerment. Well, you destroy this.
Irahj, can I ask you something? Don't you make the mistake of associating a good principle with a bad political party? Why is a state bank necessarily bad just because the ANC has corrupted every other bank? Why do we think that the privatization of electricity in South Africa will necessarily serve South Africa better? We hear of a lot of examples in many countries where the privatization has led to the type of exponential increases in tariffs. And in our country, where 70% of the people can't afford a basic meal a day, we cannot afford the state not to be involved in the provision of those services. So don't you make the mistake of undermining a good principle with a bad political party?
Irahj, before you answer, Irahj, can I throw in another question to you? The Reserve Bank, the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, a decision by the ANC conference, and we all understand it's run by the Constitution, it's regulated by the Constitution. It's not going to make a difference here or there, but it keeps on cropping up. I see Duma Kubule this week saying to nationalize it will cost about 20 million rand. So why don't we just do it and let the issue go away, because it's not going to make any difference.
Yeah, I think if I give the impression that I'm saying the state is not good and the state is not relevant and so on, then I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. I'm saying an organization that does not learn that if you want the state and organs of the state, such as the state enterprises and so on and so forth, become effective, you need to separate politics from the state and have a capable state, have people who are competent, who assume directorship and or other senior and junior one on the basis of their competence, not on the basis of their relationship and political affiliations and family relationship. If for as long as the state is as incapable, as inefficient, as corrupted as we have it now, forget about the state playing any role in the triple dilemma that we have. Therefore, whether we nationalize Reserve Bank or not, whether we nationalize Land Bank or not, it is not the issue. I'm for 20 years I've been writing about the importance of the state in sorting out developmental challenges that we have. I'll be the last person to say state is not relevant, but I'll be the first to say that a corrupted and incapable state is the mother of all problems. It's like saying.
What you then say by implication is, and that's our fear, that it's a binary option. We either have a strong state, which we don't have. The alternative is privatization, the free market, the capitalist economy. If that is the trap that we caught in between, we are in serious problems, because in South Africa, with our demographic makeup, I can tell you now, privatizing everything is not going to solve our problems. Agreed, but I'm saying also the false dichotomy that you create, that is either a binary situation globally, and it's not a problem that South Africa faces. Globally, we're reinventing governance, and therefore in that reinvention, we need to find a South African solution that bypasses this type of absolutely ungovernable situation that we've created, that the institutions that are supposed to prevent corruption, they are the mother of corruption. The institutions that are designed historically, emphasized historically, to alleviate poverty, they've become the engine of poverty creation. Government today in South Africa is the engine of poverty creation, unemployment creation, low growth. This is not the role of the state. The state
it was designed to do the opposite, but we cannot do it. So do
what
I
is-
want to put more of the
what
responsibilities to them?
What is the solution? Don't tell me we should vote in another party, because we might not do that. What is the solution to this problem you suggest to have?
The solution is to not look for a template. The solution in agriculture is different from energy. Energy is different from education. Education different from public health. We need to create new institutions that got the constitutional legitimacy of the state, but the capabilities of outside the state, be they private sector or be they non-private institutions. They have different roles to play in different sectors. We're looking for a template, state bad, good, that's the wrong way. 21st century, fourth industrial revolution has reinvented some of the solutions, including energy, including health, including food production and access to food. That's my problem.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to weigh in on this privatization thing. I want to say that actually, ironically, I would say it's the government that is actually forcing people to tend to privatized services. So everyone in South Africa now, I can safely say, would like to have their kids going to private school, including the poor. It's just that they just don't have the means. If they could, they would send their kids to private school. Who is driving them to that private service provider? Even universities are now becoming even more private. Who's driving parents to wish that their kids should go to private school? Everyone now in South Africa would want to have a private alarm system in their homes, have a private security system in their homes. Why would they wish that? I'm talking about people here who may be poor, cannot afford, but they wish they had those things. Why? Why do they wish to have those things? You can go on and on. I mean, I know people now in the suburbs who are even beginning to drill boreholes, even in the suburbs. Why are they now trying to get water for themselves? Solar panels, I mean, they are going over the roofs everywhere. It's a way in which people now have decided to say, okay, the government cannot provide the most basic services which we should only, in an ideal world, entrust to the state. The state should be providing the most basic of services: education, health, water, sanitation, and electricity. And then, of course, it must provide security. You and I, Piet, know, you taught me this thing in political science, that the state must have the monopoly over the use of violence. Right? Now, in South Africa, it's
a crop of capitalists we have in this program today.
Pete, sorry, Mpumelelo. Pete, the sad part is this: many of our police stations have private security to support them. What else can I say?
Qaanitah, before you go, I want to ask you one last thing. In the introduction to the policy conference, the president said that we will pursue the ideals of expropriation without compensation again. That was rejected by Parliament when they couldn't get the majority. And in effect, the current constitution does not allow for expropriation without compensation if it means that it's not in terms of a very specific policy framework. Why do you think the president used that phrase again, which they couldn't make fly then? And within the range of our constitution, it means something very, very different. It's a very qualified conception, that of without compensation. Why do you think he raised that again?
I think the president ticks a box. He says things that he has to say, and he raised things that, you know, the sort of a shopping list of points that he has to make. I mean, you heard from the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal making the point to say, if we didn't water down our own 2017 resolution, we would have been able to amend the constitution with the support of the EFF. You remember the EFF said that the state should be the custodian of all land, which obviously that was rejected, and the ANC didn't go for that route and sort of tried to get the middle ground, and then it didn't fail. The reality of it is that some of these exercises, the party knows that it's ill-fated and it's going to be inconsequential, but they do it anyways, so that they at least can say, look, we've tried, when they're trying to justify why they have not been successful in their land reform agenda for the last 30 years. And so what it is then, it's not an issue of the technicality of, you know, what the constitution says and what the constitution doesn't say. It's about having something to rely on when people ask you, why am I landless 30 years into democracy?
Qaanitah, you might probably be right, but nobody told Gwede Montage that, because he said some rather ridiculous things in the context of the idea that the party will portray collectively a very specific idea. He went contrary to a lot of things, and bravely, more so than anybody else. But in any case, I take your point. Thank you very much for being here. I know you said you have to be offered. It's a privilege for us to have you at the business school. I hope we can use you in the future again. I want to just, Max, if you will excuse me, I just want to return to Irahj with another question, which I think is specifically related to the policy conference. Reference was made to the debt of Eskom, and it suggested the Treasury will be involved. They will work out a plan, and that it might be that we take over, the National Fiscus take over some of the debt, at least half of that debt. And then there's also the point mooted of the likeliness of some of the power stations being sold. But given the just recent unrest of some of these power stations, and the fact that we know most of the corruption at this stage is at those power stations, I can't imagine how you're going to sell them. But okay, where do you think the money is going to come from? What do you think will Treasury do about the debt of Eskom?
It's very simple. They have no choice but to borrow more, basically take the debt off the balance sheet of Eskom, put it on the national balance sheet, national treasury. Our public debt will go up by 200 billion, 300 billion, whatever the number they choose, of the 400 billion, and Eskom will be given that money. It's as simple as that. It should have and could have and must possibly been done 15 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, where the debt would have been a fraction of what it is before between the Chancellor House, Hitachi, and General Electric stole the rest of it. National Treasury, and this is a proposition for us as a nation, not government, or not. It's not an ANC story. It's a national South African Inc. story. These institutions have stolen from us. We know it. We need to go and get the money back. We need to go and get the damages back from General Electric, Hitachi, and their local partners, and all the subcontractors involved. But here is how we've just corrupting the debate. The debate has to be, why did Medupi and Kusile from 89 billion, call it 100 billion initially, has reached 300 billion unfinished? Where did the money go? How do we get it back? It cannot be that, sorry, we were sleeping and they stole from us and we don't know who stole. We weren't sleeping. We watched them stealing. We know who was stolen, and we got to go and get the money back. And Eskom, do you understand what I'm saying? We mustn't feel a victim of hopelessness. And the fact that ANC cannot get its act together doesn't mean that the National Treasury shouldn't.
Our debt will go up from 70% roundabout to 72% of GDP. The ratings agencies has warned us against doing this specific. They mention it, don't do that. What do you think they suggest we should do if they say don't do that?
Well, I've been in discussion with a lot of debt holders, not the rating agencies, those who hold the government and the Eskom debt. And if your pension fund holds that debt, and some of it our pension funds do, what do you want the alternative be? The alternative, if National Treasury is not going to honor its guarantee of its state-owned enterprises, that you want to create another state bank, is the same thing. What should they do? Should they default? Well, if they default, what impact would that have? So forget about the rating agencies. The rating agencies just scan the consequences of what we do. What are our financing options? We either have to sell Eskom's assets. Well, nobody wants any of the assets. The old ones should have been retired 20 years ago. The new ones, Medupi and Kusile, are hopelessly badly designed and nobody wants them. So Eskom's got no balance sheet left. It's been stolen in the daylight. If you don't have assets to sell, the owner, state, has to come and say, how do I rescue it? You have to capitalize it. There is no other option. For 15 years, Pete, that I've been involved in discussions, open and in different fora, this debate has come and gone, and everybody has kicked the can down the road, thinking that if they kick it, somehow a magic solution will pop up. There is no magic solutions. Therefore, South Africa's energy sustainability and security is at stake. we need to think very, very creatively and differently. It's not about privatization. I hate privatization. I hate nationalization. That debate is the 19th century debate.
Tell me, Mpumelelo, there were about 10 discussion papers at the conference, and we seem to be critical of most of them. Which ones do you think the debate was honorable and fair and honest, and that was actually constructive, and that some policies were suggested and mooted that we can pursue from this whole conference that lasted for almost 3 days?
Well, unfortunately, those that I think were constructive, Piet, are not new either. So there's 2 proposals which I found interesting in a sense that the conference is talking about them. Not that they're new or innovative or anything like that. So the first one was the framework for professionalization of the public service. For a very long time, it's there in the National Planning Commission report that in the National Development Plan that the public service must be professionalized, and it's still a discussion in the ANC. And the president said at the conference that a national framework will be produced by the government very soon, and he was urging delegates to add more flesh into the idea that employment of employees in the public service must be merit-based. So basically, that puts into sharp focus the whole issue of cadre deployment. The other issue that I found interesting was now they thought that they need to bring back some multi-disciplinary agency to deal with corruption, which sounded to me like a proposal to bring back the scorpions in a way. So they are saying they want a new law will be passed to bring back that a multi-disciplinary agency to investigate corruption, and that will be independent. So those 2 for me were interesting, not because they are new or new ideas, or they are interesting that they are still on the table and they are constructive if they were to be implemented.
What about the views on that was expressed on the Defence Force and the Army? What was said about that? We know in what state the Army is, and what the purpose and functions of the Army are, and the capacity to execute their responsibilities. I think it was suggested they should be used at krachtstasies, at the power stations, and should have been used in KwaZulu-Natal. But what was the general policy decisions on defence?
There was a talk about the fact that the South African Police Service has to be capacitated. We need more, increased men and women in blue, because the ratio in terms of population coverage has deteriorated over a period. So you need more personnel. And then there was also discussion about Denel. I mean, again, it's a question of declaration that, yeah, we cannot allow Denel to fail. But as things stand, Denel has already failed. I don't know what else needs to be done, or the government will be able to do, because Denel does not have money, number 1. Number 2, it cannot even pay salaries. Number 3, its intellectual property rights have been stolen under the watch of the government, and to a certain extent with the facilitation of the government people themselves. And now unions have to go to court to attach the properties of the company, or as a way to try to get to extract salaries from the state arms manufacturer. So, and then also, I mean, on the army side, I think there's an expectation that the army should play more and more civilian role in trying to help the rest of the security cluster whenever there are issues. The army is already playing that role, but the army itself is badly managed. If you look at the budget vote speech by the Minister of Defense, the latest one, you will see, in fact, not the latest one, the last 5 budget vote speeches of the Ministers of Defense in the last 5 years or so, you will see that a trend that the Defense Force has been deteriorating. It doesn't have enough time for training. Equipment is underutilized. The barracks, I think during Lindy Sisulu time when she was Minister of Defense, she compiled a report that painted a sorry state of the barracks around the country. There hasn't been procurement of equipment, and there's not much capacity even in the borders to secure the borders. So the Defence Force there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But again, there's also been corruption in the Defence Force. It was used recently as a vehicle to import some unlicensed drugs for COVID from Cuba. And there's all sorts of wrong things going on there. So
if we can ask you one last question quickly about this. This conference, the policy conference, can only discuss policy. They don't make policy. That's the leadership conference at the end of the year can make policy. And in between, the National Executive Committee of the ANC can manage policy. But shouldn't the ANC empower the policy committee? Because to a certain degree, it is rather elitist. It is the leadership in the different provinces. But it's very difficult to make policy when all the different comrades and cadres from the different branches are there. And it's more a leadership election. And at the same time, they want to adopt very difficult policies and discuss them at the same time, which is hard when there are slates and competition and exclusion and inclusion and money that flows around. Shouldn't they empower this policy conference to be really the scene where policies being made in the ANC?
Well, this policy conference has several functions. The first is to review existing policy. And when we talk about existing policy, there's often a tension in a sense that there's policies of the ANC, which are not necessarily policies of the government yet. Because the ANC must win elections. After winning elections, there are certain policies that it's able to translate from being party policies to being government policies. And that transition belt is fraught with a lot of challenges. And by the time the policy becomes the official policy of the state or of the government, it has undergone a lot of transformation because it ceases to become an exclusive policy of the ANC. It becomes the policy of the country, and everyone can make a submission in parliament or in a white paper, and the policy changes from the original proposal of the ANC. So this policy conference was meant to review policies of the ANC and policies of the ANC that have made it to be becoming policies of the country, of the government, and see whether they are working, whether they're being implemented. So, and then of course, that review is supposed to come up with a report or with amendments or new suggestions about how to implement or how to change the policies as a recommendation to the elective conference in December, which now takes the final decision. So that conference in December can reverse a policy decision taken at the policy conference. It can amend, or it can adjust, or it can reject, it can do whatever, because it's the final decision maker in the ANC. It's the highest decision maker in terms of policy, in terms of leadership in the organization.
Mr. Preez, Bekim Tolo from KwaZulu-Natal, he threatens Ramaphosa. He says, in December, we'll bring back the branches. What do you think is about to happen in December, given what is the defeat of the so-called RET forces at the policy conference? One has to admit, I think they probably walk away and say, well, we've been defeated at this conference, but we won't allow that to happen again at the leadership conference. We will be renewed there. What do you think is going to happen there if you extrapolate the words of Bekim Tolo, who says, we will bring back the branches and then we will show you?
Yeah, I think it's a warning that President Ramaphosa should take seriously. Also because especially under Ace Magashule, the RET group is a lot better at operating on branch level. I mean, Ace Magashule is quite a genius with that kind of thing. That's where his power lies. He connives on local level. And that's what December is going to be. But I do think that the balance of forces is against the RET group. So however hard they try, they will get some branches in Mpumelelo and most in KwaZulu-Natal. But I don't think it's going to be very, very different from this one. It will be more difficult in the discussions and in the singing and the public order. But in terms of numbers, I'm not sure if it's going to be all that different I want to come back to your previous question and say, I thought after this conference that, yeah, this is what should be done. The policy conference should be given a higher status, as you say, because you cannot talk policy in December. It's all about contestation and stuff. And I spoke to some senior ANC people this week about that, and they said, the fact of the matter is the people in the branches don't read policy documents. Those are little microclimates of patronage. You cannot expect a delegate from some small village somewhere to come and make highly sophisticated arguments about macroeconomic policy. So this is the place where it should be. And I thought one thing that's close to my heart, and I think that is very fundamental in our society, is land, the original sin. And it's a real issue in terms of emotion, of memory, of justice, but also of potentially tackling poverty. And yet what we saw at the policy conference is a simple focus on how do we take the farms? How do we do the expropriation without compensation? And not a thought spared for looking back at the last 20 years, especially the last 15 years, and saying, why did land reform fail? Not because we didn't have the power, but because the system was incapable and corrupt. We sit with more than 5,000 farms that have been lying there fallow for years and years and years. We even have a lot of examples of Black emerging farmers on land that are being chased off by rich people in higher structures. So I miss that kind of honesty of ordinary people at the policy conference saying, guys, it's not only about having a constitutional change. The way we do land reform needs to change.
Irahj, I'm going to give you the last chance. I just want to say something. The ANC is around about 46%, according to all estimates and polls now. As it goes on, if it goes on like this, they will have to be either in a coalition or they will lose the National Assembly in 2024. They need a lot of money. We know that the United Arab Emirates have sponsored them in the past, and for some other reason, they don't do that much anymore, even though Lindiwe should have paid them a visit recently. On Tuesday, Jacques Wessels reminded me now, on Tuesday, Atashi arranged a press conference to set the record straight about ownership in their company. But everybody tells me that Chancellor House, the ANC's investment arm, owns 25% of Atashi. Wessels says, but they're shooting themselves in the foot by giving themselves public or publicity in this respect, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we have a big issue here, whether they say it or not. As a global corporation, they face huge problem. Remember, SAP, the German IT company, paid $100 million penalty in New York. They committed the crime here. They stole our money, but the American got the penalty money. This is the irony of incompetence of our state. So all these organizations are trying to protect themselves. That's why it's a public relations management to control their brand. So we have a problem here that potentially we could recover, in my estimate, 5 to 6, possibly 700 billion rand of stolen money, not all of it. But because the government is busy itself with this type of arguments that we've had over the past couple of sort of hour or so, they are not doing what the government should be doing. So there's, whether it's McKinsey's, whether it's KPMG, whether it's Hitachi, General Electric, they will do this spinning. You would have seen that yesterday, Bain, because of Peter Hain's effort, or Lord Hain's effort, eventually UK government has punished and banned Bain from doing business in UK. But they are doing business in South Africa. KPMG is still enjoying public and private sector businesses, and so on and so forth. So I think we've got ourselves into this totally inexplicable mode of governance where issues of national interest have become subordinated to matters of individual, tribal, and partisan political issues. That is a tragedy that we have to reverse. It's a constitutional democracy. Everybody has got the right to what they believe. Every party can choose, but they cannot subordinate national issues to political issues of partisan nature. That's really my plea. It's very sad.
And Glencore has just now paid a penalty for corruption in various parts of the world, except for in South Africa. They never committed any corruption, never paid any bribes. And I better believe them.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you very much to the panel. Max de Preez, thank you very much for being around. Always appreciate your presence. Pumi, my dear student, and now I'm learning from you. I much appreciate you two being here. Irahj, wonderful to have had you.
Thank you.
Good insights, well informed. I much appreciate it. I think we've learned something. We couldn't get to all the aspects of the policy conference debate, but I think we touched on the key issues and the key areas. We asked some of the difficult questions. I think we might have gotten some of the answers. I have the wrong panel in one respect, and that is that I think I have this bunch of free marketeers here today. I was hoping for somebody that will defend the ANC and the government a bit. I couldn't get that out of you. Thank you very much for being around. Also, thank you very much for Albert at the back, arranging most of this for us. And I hope to see you around again. Yes, Pumi.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for being here. Appreciate it.
Very well.
Thank you so much, Pete. Thank you to our panel as well. Great having you here.
Thank you, Albert.
Ja.
Het is ook een woord daar,